The movie begins at the Luis Sandoval residence in Bogota, Colombia, 1992. Inside, Don Luis Sandoval, the drug baron, sentimentally bids his business partner Fabio Restrepo goodbye and farewell. After Fabio leaves, Don Luis orders Marco, one of his gang members, to kill Fabio. Fabio enters his car and meets with his gang members. He expresses frustration with Don Luis's sentimental goodbye and senses danger. They leave the premises and go to Fabio's house. Fabio leaves his gang members outside while he goes inside the house to meet his wife, Alicia Restrepo, and his 9-year-old daughter, Cataleya Restrepo. Fabio informs Alicia that they have a few minutes to leave the premises because he suspects Don Luis is after them. Alicia packs their belongings while Fabio gives Cataleya a memory card containing crucial information about Don Luis's operations, informing her that it is her passport. He also entrusts her with his mother's Cataleya orchid necklace and the address of her uncle Emilio in Chicago for safety. Before the family flees, Marco and his fellow gang members raid the house and fire bullets indiscriminately, killing everyone except Cataleya. After the murders, Marco and his fellow gang members find Cataleya and demand the memory card, but she manages to escape. Marco commands his gang members to find Cataleya. They chase after her in hot pursuit, but she wittingly manages to evade them. Cataleya heads to the U.S. Embassy, where she hands over the memory card and is granted passage into America. Cataleya schemingly escapes her appointed guardian from the embassy and gets herself a bus to Chicago. Later that night, Cataleya arrives in Chicago and goes to look for her uncle, Emilio. Emilio is also a drug lord who is seen brutally beating a man and only stops after one of his gang members comes to inform him that Cataleya is looking for him. He goes and meets Cataleya in a heartwarming moment. The following morning, Cataleya wakes up in Emilio's house and finds Emilio and his mother, Mama Restrepo, having breakfast. Mama Restrepo welcomes her into the dining room and serves her. While having breakfast with Emilio, Cataleya asks about whose room she slept in, and Emilio tells her that it belonged to his son, who was killed, but he avenged his death. Cataleya asks Emilio to train her to be a killer, and Emilio agrees. Emilio takes Cataleya to a school, and even though they do not accept students during the middle of the academic year, they make an exception for her. As they leave the school premises, Cataleya throws a fit, claiming the school has nothing to teach her. Emilio pulls out a gun and shoots at a car and holds Cataleya's school bag in one hand and the gun in the other, and he asks her to choose. Cataleya chooses the school bag, and they leave the scene as the police arrive. The scene transitions to 15 years later in California, where 2 police officers indulge in refreshments in their car. A red car comes with speed and rams into them. The police officers go to arrest the driver of the red car and find Cataleya, now grown but has disguised herself as a reckless drunk woman. They apprehend her and take her into police custody, but she does not seem to pay attention while Officer Atwood reads her charges under a fake alias named Miss Phillips. They take her into custody and hold her in the cell for the night. At that moment, U.S. Marshal Warren arrives at the police station to bring into custody a criminal, Gennaro Rizzo. Officer Doyle takes Warren and Rizzo to the cell blocks, leaving Rizzo in the cell block and Joe, a police officer, in charge of guarding him. During the night, after an officer brings her coffee, Cataleya wakes up and changes her attire. She also takes a spoon and sneaks through the station's corridors until she finds her way to some water and heads into the ventilation system room. She devises a scheme that will turn off the ventilating machine for a while and grant her access to the men's side of the police station. Once she has gained access, she heads into the urinals where she meets Joe, who she makes unconscious. With the help of unconscious Joe, she gains access to Rizzo's cell, where she shoots him and draws a signature of a Cataleya orchid flower on his chest. Police officers at the station hear the gunshot fired and rush to the site, only to find Joe regaining consciousness. Cataleya schemingly finds her way back into her holding cell without alarming anyone, and she changes her attire once again. Warren and Officer Atwood come to investigate and find her sleeping in her cell. Danny meets with his friend Ryan at a restaurant, and he brings up Cataleya. Danny shows Ryan a picture of her, and he is excited to meet her. While Danny is distracted by a police officer outside, Ryan shares Cataleya's photo with his sister-in-law, Sherry. Sherry works at the FBI and runs a background check of the photo through a database. This action triggers Ross's computer in his office, informing him of a data match. To confirm, Ross and his team do a match identification process of Cataleya and the FBI suspect they're searching for. Cataleya visits Mama Restrepo while they are in church with Emilio. As Emilio and Mama Restrepo leave the church, he gets out of the car and goes to meet Marco. Cataleya calls Danny through an unknown number. Ross and other FBI agents hack this call and tap into their locations. Ross asks the FBI and SWAT team to dispatch members to Cataleya's location. Danny informs Cataleya that he took a photo of her while she was sleeping, and she senses danger. She notices the FBI already at her apartment building, and she frantically flees the place. Ross and his agents evacuate other residents, blow up Cataleya's door, and forcefully enter the apartment, but don't find her. Cataleya escapes into the garage of her apartment building and shoots down 2 CCTV cameras, and this tips off Ross and his team on where to find her. They diligently seek her out, but she manages to hide and escape through an underground train tunnel. Cataleya visits Emilio and Mama Restrepo, only to find them brutally killed by Marco in their own home. She is deeply saddened by this and mourns bitterly. Cataleya confronts Ross to gain information on Don Luisi's whereabouts. He says he can't help her access him as he is protected by the CIA, but she persuades him by threatening to kill his family. Ross visits Richard at the CIA and tells him of Cataleya's visit and her demands. Ross refuses to give up Don Luis's address, but after Cataleya threatens his life, he surrenders the location. Cataleya gathers her weapons and leaves in a red truck. She visits Stanley Smith, a land surveyor, and asks him for floor plans on Don Luis's residence. At the residence, Marco preps the rest of the gang members in anticipation of Cataleya's attack. At that moment, Cataleya launches a missile into their meeting room. As Don Luis's gang members attempt to leave the building, Cataleya intercepts them with her truck and indiscriminately fires bullets at their car. Marco hides Don Luis in a chamber and goes to help the gang face Cataleya. Cataleya is calculative and tactical in her approach and manages to outsmart all of Don Luis's gang in her attacks. They engage in an intense shootout, but Marco manages to escape. Cataleya finds Marco, they fight, and she kills him. Don Luis emerges from his hiding chamber, reaches for a black truck, and attempts to flee, but is stopped on the road by a garbage truck. Cataleya takes Marco's phone and calls Don Luis. Don Luis threatens her and brags about how he has fled, but Cataleya informs him he is right where she wants him. Don Luis looks behind the truck and notices Cataleya's dogs that are trained to kill. She instructs the dogs to attack and kill him. At the FBI offices, Ross interrogates Danny on his relationship with Cataleya. Even though they don't have charges against him, they refrain him from leaving. He requests Ross for a cup of coffee before proceeding with the questions. Cataleya calls him from a payphone. They talk and she hangs up before Ross comes and collects the phone from Danny. Ross releases Danny and Cataleya disappears in a bus, marking the end of the movie.